Hello friends and guests of my channel. This video is for those who do not know or do not want to hear Russian language. For you in English, I will try to explain my position in the situation with Ukraine. My foreign friends asked me why I don't out to protest against my country's action in Ukraine. Moreover, I condemn those who now oppose the actions of our country. Be patient, I'll try to explain. If you really want to understand, you will have to listen for a long time, since not everything is as simple as the propaganda media on both sides of the conflict shout. In this video, my personal position and an explanation of why I have this and not another opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the whole nation, but only about myself. I was born and live in the hero city of Volgograd. This is the former Stalingrad, a Russian city whose name is known all over the world, on a par with Moscow. This is a city that during the Second World War became a turning point in the war, from which the victorious march of the Soviet army in the war against fascism began, from where the fascists were driven away from the Soviet Union. If you don't know the history, use Google search about Stalingrad. In the meantime, look at the photo in my video. This is my city during and after the war in 1943-44. I was born 20 years after the end of the war, but even there were still many evidences of that war in our city. Destroyed buildings after the Nazi bombing. If you don't know the history of Russia, you will never understand a Russian person. My parents were born before the war and remembered all the military horrors of their childhood. In my youth, there were still a lot of people who participated in that war. My grandfathers also fought and went through the whole war. Some relatives died in it. These people personally told us children and teenagers about all the horrors of war. You see, not books, not TV, not social networks, not propaganda, but living witnesses of what happened during the war and what fascism is. There were many people crippled by the war, without legs, without arms, deaf and blind in the bombing. At school, my history teacher was a child during the war who was evacuated from Stalingrad on a raft across the Volga River under the continuous bombing of the Nazis. A child who saw only death, grief, hunger and pain as a child. Our city was completely destroyed in the war, to the ground. Not a single whole building remained. This is not a figure of speech. Literally, there is not a single whole building left, only ruins. People lived in dugouts and rebuilt their city. In Volgograd, many places are dedicated to the memory of soldiers, mothers and children who died in the war, and there are many memorials dedicated to historical evidence of the atrocities of the fascists on Russian soil. My generation, and I'm 58 years old, hates everything related with Nazism and fascism. We don't need to shout, "Wake up! Wake up you, those who have forgotten or don't know the history. We don't sleep, we are always ready. It's you who need to wake up and open your eyes to what is happening in your countries." And now I tell you how I form my own opinion. I'm a blogger, a person with 2 higher educations in the humanities and economics. I'm fluent in English, German and know Ukrainian. You see, I'm not a farmer from the hinterland, not a poorly educated person. Bears don't walk our streets. Volgograd has a population of over 1 million people. When I see demonstrations in Europe against Russia, I want to remind you that Russia is a very big country. For example, the Volgograd region, in which Volgograd is located, along the borders of its territory is 2,184 kilometers. The Volgograd region covers an area of 114,000 square kilometers. If we take such Western European countries as Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium and Luxembourg, then they would all be freely located on the territory of our region. And it is just one region of Russia. The Russian Federation consists of 85 federal subjects, 46 of which are called region, oblast. And I am proud of my city and my country. I live in a modern, beautiful city with modern infrastructure, which was built after the Second World War, which we call the Great Patriotic War, on ruins, on land watered with the blood of Russian and Ukrainian soldiers, Belarusians, Kazakhs, Uzbeks and other people of the USSR who died here in the war against fascism. We haven't forgotten anything. Russians remember everything because we teach children in schools and in families to know their history. Now let's talk about Ukraine. My mother is Ukrainian, my father is Russian. My grandmothers did not know Russian, and as a child I spoke to them in Ukrainian. I grew up with my grandmothers in the Crimea, where my ancestors lived. My grandparents are buried there. I have many relatives living in Ukraine. All my life I have been communicated with friends from different countries, with those who used to live in Russia and left, as well as with those whom I met at work and on the internet. All these years I have been talking to Ukrainians and watching how their attitude towards Russians is changing. Russians don't treat Ukrainians, you see, but the attitude of Ukrainian citizens to Russians. When the situation began to escalate, I visited Ukrainian channels on YouTube a lot, watched their news channels, but more visited bloggers leave broadcasts and read chat rooms where ordinary Ukrainians wrote messages. I was unpleasantly struck by the hatred and Nazi statements that I read there. Those attacks on ordinary Russian people, insults against Russia. I felt that this hatred was growing like a snowball. More and more Ukrainians are amazed by this rotten propaganda that was planted in Ukraine from the outside. I had to stop communicating with many friends from Ukraine, since their position was difficult to attribute to healthy thinking. The rabid nationalism position was increasingly developing into Nazism. The worship of Bandera, the fascist war criminal, simply defined my understanding. What was happening in Donbass and Odessa did not fit into the framework of humanism at all. I repeat, I am not one of the people who blindly succumbed to propaganda from either side. I am used to forming my own opinion about everything, and before forming it, studying as many sources of information and opposing points of view as possible. The attitude of ordinary Ukrainians to what is happening in the Donbass, from Lugansk and Donetsk, dancing on the corpses of people burned in Odessa, cannot be explained by any reasonable arguments of the struggle for the independence of Ukraine. The slogans "Moskaliaku na Giliaku" have sounded and are sounding all over Ukraine. If you don't understand what this means, I'll explain it to you. This is insult to the entire Russian people. This means the same thing as a Russian on a spear, knives on a stake. I draw your attention, it was not the Russians who shouted slogans against Ukrainians. It was not we who unleashed this hatred. I was still trying to understand, forgive and explain that these are not all Ukrainians, that they are nationalists. I was still trying to believe that it just couldn't be, but it was pouring in from all sides of Ukraine. It was enthusiastically pronounced by Ukrainian bloggers, my friends until recently. In live chat rooms, ordinary Ukrainians wrote, "Kill all Russians, bomb Moscow, strangle every Russian in Ukraine, beat and destroy everyone who speaks Russian in Ukraine. They call us Russian fascists." What's it? Who did this to their brains? Just don't tell me that they suddenly decided so themselves. We did not do anything to Ukraine before these events that could cause such a reaction. Neither the country nor ordinary Russian people. A whole generation has grown up in Ukraine, brought up on values alien to any Slavic people. The people who had lived in kinship and friendship with Russia for centuries suddenly hated their relatives. What are the values of the Western world that have blinded the eyes of Ukrainians, who have forgotten history, forgotten the Russian language, forgotten how their grandfathers fought against fascism? What made relatives abandon their relatives in Russia? And I also want to say that Russia has been beaten so much over its 1,000-year history that there are special qualities in the blood, in the genetics of the Russian person that other peoples will never understand. There is a saying in Russia, "Нас бьют, а мы крепчаем." They beat us, but we grow stronger. It was out of politics. I didn't speak on any side of this confrontation. I am no longer at the age and the health when people go to demonstrations and shout slogans. The Western countries that imposed their sanctions on Russia and united against our country have done a very good thing, a great thing for Russia, without realizing it themselves. You will be interested to know that our youth, who due to their involvement in internet resources with provocative content were demoralized and did not have their own clear political and ideological position. Russians of all generations have railed together now after the total Russophobic attack that has unfolded everywhere in the world, in a way that I have not observed over the past many years. You will never understand this peculiarity of ours. Otherwise, your political scientists would not have made this mistake. I haven't seen the patriotic upsurge that I'm witnessing in my country for a long time since Soviet times. Thank you, our enemies from all countries, for our unity, for our sense of patriotism, for the spiritual uplift of our Russian nation. You can't understand Russia with your mind. You can't measure it with your common yard. In other words, it is impossible to evaluate with your Western values that is valuable and sacred for a Russian person. Understand at least one simple truth. Russia will never, under any circumstances, put up with fascism and all its manifestation on the whole earth. We remember everything. We haven't forgotten anything. Now Russians are called invaders. We don't need your little country, Ukrainians. Ukrainians are shooting. From whom do you want to free us? If you yourself have become blind and deaf, if you have forgotten history, if you have, as they say, confused the shows, then take out old history textbooks and read what future your foreign friends had in store for you in that long ago war. It's native to think that their plans for you have changed a lot since then. I'm very sorry for all the civilians of Ukraine. I feel sorry for the children whose unreasonable parents are guilty of allowing such a magnificent growth of Nazism in their country. Wake up, Ukrainians. You are looking for enemies in the wrong place. До свидания, друзья. Goodbye, friends. I think you understood.